You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm the president and founder of the California Rock Art Foundation. And what we do is we identify, evaluate, manage, and conserve rock art both in Alta California and in Baja California. We conduct field trips, we have trainings, exercise, we do research, and in every way possible, we try to preserve, protect, and coordinate treasures of Alta and Baja California rock art, of which there are many and diverse. We also work closely with Native Americans and partner with them to recognize and protect sacred sites. So for more info about the fabulous California Rock Art Foundation, you can go to carockart.org. Also, I'm open to give me a call, 805-312-2261. We would welcome sponsorship or underwriting, helping us to defray the costs of our podcasts, and also membership in California Rock Art Foundation. And of course, donations, since we are a 501c3 nonprofit scientific and educational corporation. God bless everyone out there in podcast land.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel, for the 94th episode of the Rock Art Podcast. And we're blessed and honored to have Hannah Salyer, a rock art aficionado and author of, get this, a children's book on rock art. And we'll learn more about Hannah's background, the subject matter, and why she was compelled to write such a interesting and one-off, probably one of the only examples of this particular genre. Hannah, are you there?
Yes.
Well, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yes, it's surreal to be on the show with you because I've listened to so many episodes, and actually the Rock Art Podcast was a formative resource and just incredibly helpful in the writing of this book. The book is called Ancestory, The Mystery and Majesty of Ancient Cave Art.
Well, that's quite a moniker, I have to say. Let's step back a bit before we plunge into the main subject of our interview and interaction, our conversation here on the Rock Art Podcast. Hannah, how in the heck did you get interested in, of all subjects, rock art?
So how I got into the subject of rock art is a story I think many of us share, in that I remember quite vividly my first exposure to rock art as a pretty young kid and just being utterly besotted. I mean, I remember seeing, I think it was Cuevas de los Manos, like either a replica or a giant photo at the Natural History Museum. And I remember being a kid and just feeling like, wow, this is really profound and really important. And I didn't have the language for it at the time. Yeah, certainly. It really did. It was very powerful.
And you somehow got the bug about something that we call rock art. So where is the Cueva de los Manos?
I believe that's in Argentina.
Argentina.
Yes.
Okay. So that was an initial exposure. You must have somehow done something or had activities that caused you to continue down that path at some point. What was that all about, Hannah?
Yeah, so I think, I am first and foremost an artist. I'm a storyteller. As you mentioned, I make picture books for kids. And I write many of the stories. Sometimes I'm just illustrating them, but always illustrating. So sometimes I'm writing, sometimes I'm illustrating someone else's story. But I have my hands in a lot of jars artistically, and I always have. I do ceramics, I paint, and I make my living as an illustrator, but have always been an artistic kid, and I think inherently felt connected to, those ancient artists and those ancestors. And so throughout my existence, rock art has come up a few times, and I've always taken note. When I was young, I was really interested. Then again in high school, I remember taking a history class, and they started with the Lascaux Caves. And I remember being introduced and just wanting to stay on that subject. I'm like, forget all the other stuff. I just want to stay here. Then, so what brought me to, present day and wanting to make this book and feeling really strongly that, it was important for me to make this book was Werner Herzog's Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Watching it for the first time. And I remember being like moved to tears, and I was like, that there needs to be a picture book about this. So that's kind of, it kept coming up in my life and was always really notable for me.
So you had mentioned that you're an artist, correct?
Yes.
So tell us a bit about being an artist and how that has come about and how that particular passion and competency twins with the study of rock art.
Well, like I mentioned, I always have been a creative kid, was always finding ways to just make things and mess with all different types of materials, not only 2D, but I was like sewing and using clay. And I still bring that different types of media into my work now. And, I was the type of kid in high school. I hung out in the art room. Didn't do much else, but I just was, I was really lucky to always have family who supported me on that path.
So art in all its different fashions, its different subject matter and tapestries appears to be a central pivot point, a central sort of thread in your entire life.
Yes, indeed. And, again, like I mentioned, I think I've always felt, the focus of my art has always been on, I think, ecosystems and other species and plants and animals. But at the heart of that, I think, looking to other things on our planet and just being so enamored with them helps me understand my humanity.
So you've really had a passion almost in the anthropology or ecology of art in terms of looking at our biosphere, looking at the natural world, looking at animals and plants and relationships and things along those lines. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. Really well put.
Well, interesting. I don't think I've had someone with your particular niche anywhere on the Rock Art podcast. Everybody comes to this adventure in different ways. You also had mentioned that part of your past has been involved with children's books. You said that very quickly. Maybe tell us a bit about that chapter of your life.
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, I'm still in it. I'm kind of, this feels like, so for context, I went to art school. I went to Pratt in Brooklyn, Pratt Institute, and, met some really wonderful mentors there, made some great friends who are also talented artists. And, being part of an art community, I feel like it can often enrich your own practice. And it certainly did that for me. And, at school, I kind of came to this realization that, when I was younger, I would write and draw books and make books and write stories and comics. And I loved storytelling. That was always really important for me. And it's something that I just would kind of do very inherently and naturally, just about, I don't know, just, how to kind of understand, make sense of my life as it was happening. Storytelling was always crucial for me, and certainly books as well. But I loved writing stories. In school, I was reminded that I loved writing stories and telling visual stories, and realized, oh, wait, I can make a career out of, creating books for young people. And the minute I realized that, that was just incredibly exciting to me.
Quite an epiphany, huh? So it's the visual storytelling and also for children and young adults, certainly, that has been part of your life, correct?
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I, you mentioned children and young adults, and it's true. Another thing I consider when I'm working on books and writing stories is I want the stories I write and work on to be accessible to everyone. Maurice Sendak, he created Where the Wild Things Are. He had a famous quote along the lines of, you should never write down to children. Picture books should be for everyone to enjoy. And I always think about that when I'm working on books, for young kids. Every person in every stage of their life should be able to enjoy a picture book. So that's a huge underlying philosophy for me when I'm working on these stories.
And how does that guide your hand in terms of entertaining the notion of different pictures? How do you bridge the gap between all these different ages and levels of maturity? I would think that would be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it certainly is, and I think what I've realized in doing this work, and I should say I also have experience working directly with children. So babysitting and being a nanny, and also like working in, I used to teach and still teach some art lessons for kids. I am in close proximity to kids, and I see what they pick up on, and it's a lot. And sometimes people, us older folks don't give young people and little people the credit, for what they can kind of understand. But it's just about finding the right way to convey ideas and, making sure your vocabulary is accessible. I love kind of using really interesting words and dropping big words in there, but you also need to make sure that you have a kind of scaffolding in your story to help a reader understand a word that they might not know, or learn a new word. So that's, an example of something I think about when I'm writing. I don't necessarily want to I'm not trying to dumb down language in any way, but, I like to keep things simple, but when I can, kids love learning new, fun, big words. And I remember loving that. So I try to do it when I can using that language.
My son tells me I vomit a dictionary.
What an image.
That's what he tells me. So, and my esposa para siempre, my wife forever, is a little Tejana mama. And so we have tremendous fun with words. She's speaking Spanish and teaching me, and I using my standard vocabulary. And so if I use a word that's too complicated for her, I'll say, "Do you know what that means?" She goes, "No, but I'm sure you can explain it to me." Says, "But I'm not sure I wanted to know quite that much about it." So anyways, words are fascinating, and it kind of forms the tapestry of my life as well. People call me a wordsmith or the grand synthesizer. So I think you with your niche are a grand synthesizer as well in terms of twinning or pairing pictures and words. Talk to me about that.
That's a really good question. And I would say it's different with every story. For Ancestory in particular, my rock art book, I would say the images came first.
Really? That's surprising, huh?
Yeah. I was really meditating on these images from all of these different rock art sites around the world. I was really grateful for the Bradshaw Foundation because that site was just so great in helping me access and learn about all these different sites in a very centralized location. So I remember I was just kind of doing a lot of research about all the sites globally. And I remember in the beginning, I was just trying to work through the images. I was painting, I was using pencil, I was kind of using there's a type of acrylic medium that's essentially material that you can mix into paint that has like bits of pumice stone in it.
Really?
And I was kind of experimenting and with paper clay and all these really textural things. And of course, charcoal and different drawing minerals, essentially.
So different mediums to execute some of the pictures for the book.
Yes, exactly. I didn't know what I was doing, but for this book, it was very much starting with the visuals, trying to get a certain feeling.
What feeling was that you were trying to communicate or entertain? I would imagine it was had to do with the emotions, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, it certainly did. And I think, I was trying to get back to that feeling I told you about of just being utterly
Gobsmacked, awestruck.
Yeah, really, really awestruck and just so fascinated and, just conveying this sense of power and mystery that is inherent in rock art, right? Because these images are so powerful, but there's also, as much as we're learning about these sites and these images, there's still so much we don't know.
And that's fabulous and a great place to stop. In the next segment, we'll continue this conversation. See you in the flip-flop, gang. Hey, all you rock art podcasters, it's Dr. Alan Garfinkel, your host with the California Rock Art Foundation. And we have Professor Salyer, Hannah Salyer, who's going to be sharing with us more reflections and some of the details surrounding her forthcoming book on rock art, oriented towards the younger cast of individuals, children's book. Hannah, are you with us?
Yes. Hello, Alan.
Hi, Hannah. Believe it or not, that's the same name as my daughter, Hannah. She spells it that way too. So you're in good company. So what about this? So what about this children's book? When did you get the bug or get the opportunity to put such a book together, and what was the development surrounding that initiative? It sounds like you were cultivated or had the opportunity to talk about this to a major publishing house. Am I correct?
Yes, I was super lucky. So the way this book came about, I had just finished up my debut picture book, which is called Packs, Strength, and Numbers. Packs as in Packs. That is about different species who work together and why they work together in groups. So I had just finished up the writing and the illustration, and I turned it in. And that was actually, I had worked on that book with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. I got connected with them through, I have a literary agent who focuses specifically on children's literature. She connected me to Houghton Mifflin, and I, for that first book, I worked with a team that just really, really understood where I was coming from. My editor was right there with me on the same page. She, I would say, holds a lot of the core kind of values that I do, which is incredibly lucky to have my first editor be someone so amazing. Her name's Kate O'Sullivan. And so, when this idea popped up, I certainly was interested in working with the same team again, because we had such a good workflow and she really understood where I was coming from.
Tell me about the values and where you were coming from, Hannah. Give me sort of a glimpse of what your consciousness was, what your value system was. What was it that you were espousing sort of in the picture book, in the initial book?
That's a good question. So, as I mentioned before, I feel like I make a lot of my work kind of zooming out and thinking about the planet as this living, breathing kind of organism of sorts with all these different ecosystems, and really focusing on, certainly the principles in that first book, how we really do all work together on this planet within these systems. Like we rely on each other, and when I say we, I mean all different species.
What you're saying, of course, and you're probably aware of this, is that sort of an indigenous, their cosmology, their religion, is that all things on this planet, all things in the landscape are sentient. Love that word. They're alive, they have agency, they make decisions, and that they matter. This is plants, animals, trees, rocks, etc., water, etc. And so by taking that perspective, you're sort of living in the same world as indigenous native people.
Yeah, most certainly.
It's very different than the Western or Cartesian perspective, which sort of views humankind as sort of the purveyors or managers, and all else in the world sort of as our, not our playthings, but our responsibility to do things with and allow us to create value and engineer a particular area so it's more productive, or having the particular resources or materials that we need to live, meaning humankind. Very different. And you understand what I'm saying, don't you, Hannah?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something I think about all the time. And I think, I've always been drawn to stories that really push back on human exceptionalism, stories that are rooted in not, cultures that aren't Western, kind of, that have dominated the narrative for so long. These like imperialist stories that talk a lot about taking and how humans are, like you said, the kind of pinnacle of evolution, and all of these, like, those ideas felt so damaging and foreign to me.
It's really very interesting, Hannah, because I work with a whole bevy of archaeologists, anthropologists, various professionals with various hats on. And in the language that they use, in the perspective that they use, it comes in even when they're dealing with resources that are native, generated, be they archaeological sites or artifacts. So there is this kind of philosophy, or this kind of perspective. So in other words, even the field that I work with, it's called cultural resource management. Well,
Wow.
I mean, isn't that a rather Western version of the way to think about things? These are cultural resources that we're managing.
Oh, yeah.
And then when I developed the California Rock Art Foundation, right, I thought I was being very sensitive to Native Americans, right? And so I had some key words that went along with California Rock Art Foundation. And it was, respect and conserve, discover. And the Native American says, no, sorry, get rid of that word. Discover? You didn't discover them. I've been here. I know where they are. I did them. You're not discovering them. But you see how sort of sensitive or sort of duplicitous some of this stuff can be?
Oh, yeah, it absolutely. It's something I kept experiencing in my research for this book.
Well, tell me about that. That's interesting. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, so, tailing on your comment about the word discover.
Yeah.
In the book, I'm really careful to always say, if the notion of discover is in there, it's always rediscover. It's always, like unveiling something that was known about, but it wasn't maybe known about to, it was lost for a bit.
Right.
I talk about these sites as treasures that were,
oh, I do too. That's good.
So powerful, and they held so much power, and they still hold so much power, but they got lost, and we're just refinding them.
And it's really interesting talking to you, Hannah, because this sort of picks up on some of the work I've done in this field called cognitive neuroscience, or neurotheology, or neurophysiology, and that's become one of my more favorite things. And the more you talk about the way you see rock art, it certainly feels a bit like this, where we're talking about how people view the rock art, and to this very day, it still communicates to them. it causes them to emote, to have emotions. And this emotion might be fear or mystery or intrigue or curiosity or joy or sadness or surprise, or even homage and connection to a higher power. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I haven't visited many sites in person because I didn't even mention, but I got the contract for this book right as COVID hit. So
Sure.
that's a whole other vein I can go down. You know, I had all these research trips planned, and then it was just like poof, none of that could happen. And that's actually how I got connected to the Rock Art Network and Dr. Carolyn Boyd. And and she connected me with Dr. Jeanette Deacon and Noel Hidalgo Tan in Thailand. And so that was a really interesting pivot that happened because of COVID. But back to what, you were saying about emoting and feeling the power of these sites, I was really lucky to visit one site in Utah. It was Horseshoe Canyon, the petroglyphs of Horseshoe Canyon. And it was like, I remember it's amazing because for Horseshoe Canyon, you have to hike 5 miles in to the canyon to what they call I think it's the Great Theater, the Grand Theater. But all throughout your hike throughout the canyon, there are scattered petroglyphs. So you're making your way to this theater of sorts, and you're seeing along the way there's incredible petroglyphs. There's also a ton of graffiti, which was sad to see.
Troubling and sad, yeah.
But seeing those petroglyphs and then getting to the theater, I mean, it really felt like the artist could have been there 10 minutes ago. I mean, it was just so profound how much power, I keep repeating that word power, but
no, but I feel the same way, Hannah, because when you see these images, it's like they're being seen for the first time, because they're speaking to your soul, they're speaking to your eyes and your heart, and sometimes it's been quite a while since someone has visited them. If you're in a out of the way spot, you might be one of the few people who've had an opportunity to process and understand and see these images, and it certainly feels like that. Anyways, Hannah, you get this sort of I don't know how you'd put it. You just get a special flavor, don't you?
Yeah, I would say it was kind of, for me, it felt like stepping into a time machine. I mean, it could have been any time on the planet. You could have told me like I had been transported back to a different era and I would have believed you. It feels like time is frozen in a sense, but it's also, you also feel the immensity of all the years and the millennia that have passed. And even though, these works, some of them are, a couple thousand years old, maybe even a couple hundred years old, they're connecting to something much, well, I talk about it in the book. It's our ancestry. It's this story that continues, and it's, we keep writing chapters in this book, and it's just a story that keeps unraveling.
And I keep talking about, when I think about rock art, I explain it as a freeze frame. It captures an image and a feeling, an emotion, a picture, a panel, a story, as you put it, locked in time. And it's like an invaluable time capsule that provides a window into the past, into the author's perspective on what was important in life, and how they perceived the universe and the cosmology and the relationship that they had to their world. And it is rather special, and I think that rock art could be one of the most valuable data sets that archaeologists have to deal with. Although I might be biased, Hannah.
Well, I mean, I'm not an archaeologist, but I would agree with you as an artist. I mean, it's so important, as I had felt before, but working on the book, I felt even more so. Like, this is incredibly important. It should be part of every curriculum. Kids should be learning all about this. And I don't think kids have a ton of exposure to it unless it's something that, you live close to a site, or maybe it's mentioned in your art class, like it was for me. Maybe you get to a museum that has an exhibit about rock art, but it's not as common as I would hope, it would be.
And it's really not something that the general public or the school systems have really entertained a notion of beginning to entertain and inform simultaneously. Hannah, that's another good place to jump off and return for the third and final segment of our conversation today. And I think on this last piece, we're going to delve right in to the book and talk about it in specifics. Thanks,
Okay,
Hannah.
great.
See you, gang. See you in the flip-flop. Well, welcome back, all you rock art podcasters, for the third and final segment of the 94th episode of the Rock Art Podcast on the Archaeology Podcast Network. Your host, Dr. Alan Garfinkel, California Rock Art Foundation. Hannah Salyer, noted author and artist, is with us today to give us a glimpse into her thinking and her work on writing a children's book on rock art. So, Hannah, you're writing your children's book on rock art. Tell us about the adventure, the challenges, the peaks, the circumstances, your experience of crafting this book, and bring us along on that little bit of a journey. How's that, Hannah?
Yeah, sure, Alan. And what a journey it was. It really was. I had such an incredible time working on this book, and it took me a while. It took probably about 3.5 years in total, which, there are folks who work way longer on books, but for a picture book, often folks are surprised to hear that you spend so long on a picture book for children. But, this one had so much. I wanted to make sure I was doing really extensive research. Like I said, I'm not an archaeologist. I don't purport to be one. And, I really wanted to get a sense not only of the sites themselves, but what we know about rock art. And that's where this podcast really was so helpful.
Hannah, what was your biggest surprise in your research that you discovered?
Biggest surprise.
Or even some sort of a theme that you teased out from your research?
Well, I think what's, being said in the story is it's not, as Alan, I'm sure, you've seen the book, gone through it, a digital copy. It's not, I tried not to just spit facts out. I'm really trying to engage the reader. I'm asking a lot of questions, because what I've found in my research and, reading texts and finding websites about all these different rock art sites and theories and stuff, information on materials, is that it's more important to be asking questions than jumping to conclusions about what's going on. So
it's about the questions, it's about the mystery, it's about asking interesting questions, but not necessarily clearly or even completely responding to them, but perhaps they provide even more interesting or sophisticated questions as one delves into that subject matter.
Yes, precisely.
So tell us about your questions.
Well, I didn't plan it this way initially, but what ended up happening is I'm talking a lot about the senses, what you're seeing in these, when you are witnessing these sites and this art, what you're hearing in the sites, what you're feeling, the tactile nature. That was a huge, the tactility element was a really big consideration for me in crafting this book. I actually, for a lot of the illustrations, I was building ceramic replicas of sites and, drawing, replicating or referencing actual rock art sites and then photographing those mini sites that I had made and then illustrating over the photographs to give this sense of, you're really feeling the tactility of stone and of minerals from the earth, because I was using that stuff.
Yeah. You really wrapped your mind and your body around the subject.
Yeah. And, I mentioned I couldn't do a lot of research travel because of COVID. So I brought the sites to me. My studio is filled with caves, mini caves. Yeah.
Fabulous, Hannah. What an interesting way to develop the interactive qualities of rock art sites. That's fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And I don't know if you're aware, or you probably are from all of your listening and research to this archaeoacoustics element of rock art sites, such as that amphitheater and others that are sites that naturally are ensconced in some kind of an amphitheater or a resonating place, and even that has echophonic properties.
Yes, exactly. I was thinking a lot about that because I myself am not a musician, but my partner is actually a musician, and he's very sensitive to acoustics. And of course, I heard that wonderful episode about archaeoacoustics of the Rock Art podcast, and that really helped me think about that aspect and how to include it in the story. And basically I say, what did our ancestors think when they heard these echoes? I can read actually, many of the sites also have unique soundscapes, deep resonant chambers, rocks that ring when they are hit, and walls that seem to talk back. So, kind of crafting
the ringing rocks.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm trying to craft that theater for the reader who's, ostensibly going to be a child. I want them to imagine and feel like they're there.
Yeah. Well, you this book sounds like you delved in a way and probed and asked enticing questions and have the story develop. Tell me a bit about developing the storyline. That must have been a challenge as well.
Oh, no, it's a walk in the park.
Oh, yeah. Very, very, very easy.
Yes.
Because people have told me, I did a movie, and you may have seen it. It's called Talking Stone. It's a show. It was on PBS, and with an award-winning cinematographer. And he said it was one of the hardest efforts he's ever done to make the rocks talk, to make them speak and sing and have engaging narratives, so that someone can watch a movie and see a story or connect with a story that hooks them and that provides them with an understanding and an interest level to elevate them and engage them throughout an hour-long journey into this science and study of rock art. And he said it was difficult. It was difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my journey took me 4 years to make this, hour-long cinematography. And you took about the same time to do this book. People wonder about that. I've done lots of different books and articles. My articles take about two years. Books take about 4 minimum. And that's for a lengthy book or something along those lines. And some people seem to be able to knock them out much further, but I don't think they've engaged the subject in sort of a scholarly, deep, and abiding way. Do you agree, Hannah?
In terms of rock art?
Yes, in terms of whatever subject, but even with rock art, to really be a scholar and understand what you're working with, the subject matter, it takes time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the kind of what I discovered quickly and was not surprising to me, in dealing with the subject matter of rock art, there are some philosophical underpinnings here. There are many. And kind of going back to what we were talking about with, making it accessible to children, that was a challenge. Really, there were so many edits to the manuscript and the language and the story structure. Another consideration that I was thinking a lot about was I wanted the book to certainly give kids information, because kids love to just learn. That's the beauty of nonfiction books. They get to learn new things. But I also wanted to leave a lot of space for mystery and curiosity, and even a little, not fear, but a little kind of darkness.
Yeah, reverence, sort
Yes.
of a, kind of an homage, that's sort of an overwhelming experience, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think leaving space in stories can be really powerful. I have certain spreads where I'm listing information. Like I have a spread about different rock art sites that have more kind of symbolic images and what that means. And then I have, following that, a spread about, the different prehistoric species we're seeing in some of the rock art sites. But then I have spreads that have very sparse text, that are really jarring imagery. There's one spread that's it's going to be a fold out spread that has no text at all. And it's just you in the Lascaux caves, actually with the 4 boys who rediscovered it. And I wanted, I think that silence is really important. Just the absence of words and letting the reader take in, behold this incredible visage before them.
Yeah. And it is very, very powerful. And I guess as we get more and more information about it, they talk about the flickering fires that could have been there and animated the rock art images so that they moved and they created and were enlivened on the walls of the rock canvas. So there's that.
Yes.
And then the sounds that they might have heard or thought they heard from the crackling fire or from the rocks themselves, or the dripping of water, and how those emanated or reverberated. So all of that and much more. Well, Hannah, as we near the end of our interactive conversation, tell us a bit of when the book will be available and anything you think you'd like our listeners to hear or take away from this hour of our discussion.
Okay, well, I will start with, the book is going to publish officially on April 11th, 2023. So this spring. I actually believe you can pre-order it right now, which is super helpful. If you are listening and you want to check out this book and you want to help a small creator and, help this book take off, pre-ordering, as I'm sure, Alan, you well know, is so helpful. It shows the publisher people are interested. As far as takeaways from the book, so I should mention there's a lot of back matter in the book. There's the story, and then the back matter is kind of just info in the back that couldn't be put into the manuscript. It just didn't quite fit, but I felt like it was really crucial to have in the book. And, there's a site map of all different sites around the globe. Not every single one, but I tried to hit every continent and small, groups of islands. And then I have, amongst other things, I have an author's note where I'm talking about the fact that, it's really important to recognize that to our ancestors making these markings, it was not merely art. And I think you've talked about this before too. Rock art is kind of a misnomer. Very much these sites were, from what we understand, they were functional, they held information, they were kind of living sites.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mentioned like they continue to hold that importance and those functions. And in addition, they're now time capsules. They hold this incredible information about our history on the planet. And I also, I mentioned supporting and uplifting Indigenous communities all over the place, because as we well know, they're treated pretty horribly by most countries. And there's been a lot of problematic language around rock art and, not giving credit where credit's due. So I felt that it was really important, to mention how Indigenous communities are a part of this story, a really big part of this story.
Amen. I like that. Well, Hannah, that's about all we have time for today, but I'd love to invite you back when the book is out, and we'll revisit some of these incredible topics. Hannah, it was just a delight and a pleasure, and I'm so glad you had an opportunity to share your passion on rock art and the book. See you soon, all my listeners. See you in the flip-flop, gang.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.archpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.